Chess Man Dan, playing chess every day to get at chess. Continuing on our road to 1500 ELO, we're sitting at 1132. Today's game, I will be covering the Dutch defense against the London system. Which is better? We'll find out. So the whole idea with the Dutch defense is in response to d4. So if we want a good opening against d4 Dutch defense, recommendation though, do not play the Dutch defense really if you're under 1000 ELO. The reason being is that you end up weakening your king side, and at under 1000 ELO, people don't really play principled, and you could just be putting yourself at jeopardy. d4, f5, f4. So here my opponent, kicking out his R-squared bishop, is playing the London system. I've played plenty of games as the London system, so I figured in this game, the moment I saw the R-squared bishop, is like, oh, I think the Dutch defense will actually be pretty good against this London system. Keep in mind, this is the first time I'm playing against the London system. We're using the Dutch. I go f6 is all the book moves. Thus far, the idea with kicking out your e6 pawn is you're activating your dark squared bishop. The general idea of the opening for the Dutch defense is that whenever your opponent's queen knight is developed, you'd like to pin it to the king and get rid of it. Here my opponent is pushing his pawn to c4. The idea with c4 is common in the London system. If you've studied some theory, you know that depending on black's opening, you could transpose the London system to a queen's gambit variation. It's still the London system, but these two pawns is pretty strong. It's not the best though. Here I decided to check because the whole idea of checking is I wanted him to block with the knight, and I would take the knight once I'm provoked. Here, block to check. I decided to push my, it's saying it's an accuracy. Pawn b6 is I just want to flank head of my bishop. I want to continue development. Hitting this knight to the king is called holding the tension, right? This is a game of chess, not checkers. It's not always good to take. If you can keep the tension, why not? Here my opponent decides to develop his knight. I decide to fianchetto. My opponent decides to put his light squared bishop. This is a very typical London system. A very principled player, very principled opening. However, from the studying of the Dutch defense that I've done thus far, I know it's very wise to put either a bishop or your knight in the center and have a center control. I decide to castle. My opponent castles. Now I decide to take. Why did I take now? Well, it's always good to remember what pieces you're what is pinned. Right, so that knight was pinned to the king. The moment he castled, I need to get rid of this knight. If not, I lose that opportunity. So I take, even exchange, especially during the Dutch defense. This is what you want. And now I decide to put my bishop in the center. What's the idea with this? Is I need to disrupt the center. That's just kind of my mindset. The studying of the Dutch defense I've done so far is you want to disrupt your opponent's center. Here my opponent decides to kick out his knight. The idea with that knight is the moment I'm assuming is the moment I take his bishop, he will take back. Instead, after I take, my opponent decides to take with the queen. And now I decide to put my knight in the center, just center control. Now my opponent decides to kick my knight back. And from this point, I decide to do the same. I did decide to retreat my my knight for safety. However, I figured, hey, should I move backwards or should I do equal danger threats? Principle in chess, you do not have to respond to danger. Is if you another way of responding to danger, instead of just moving your piece that's in danger, is provide an equal or greater threat to your opponent. So I said, okay, take my knight, I'll take your knight. And that's what happened. And now if you look at my opponent's center, very ugly, two double stacked pawns. I was like, okay, I feel like this is exploitable. If you look at the eval bar, it's a 1.3 advantage for white though. However, I felt fine in this position. I was like, okay. Now my opponent decides to take. I guess the best move would have been taking with the pawn. Or just moving back. Okay, cool. Just maintaining center control. I decide to kick my knight out. I guess the best opportunity would have take this pawn. But I don't know. I just felt like it was fine. And here my opponent decides to attack my pawn, or my knight. But what was defending that bishop? That pawn. And from here, the game was pretty much mine. So notice in just 2 moves, you have an almost 2-point advantage for white. So now he's down 4.4 material. Here my opponent decides to threaten my knight. And the moment I'm up material, I decided, hey, should I retreat or should I defend? Which is best? I figured defending that knight with a queen. Why? Because I'm losing tempo. At this point of the game, I want to make sure I'm pushing my pieces forward. I do not want to move back unless I absolutely have to. My opponent decides to move his rook, just activating his endgame piece. I decide, hey, now I'm going to kick his queen out the way. The moment he takes a queen, guess what? Free pawn. We're approaching the endgame. If we're not in endgame already, what's the name of the game? If you can't find a checkmate, take away his pawns. My opponent takes my pawn. I take another pawn while gaining tempo on my opponent's queen. My opponent goes to the best square possible. And from here, I decide to take another pawn. So now I'm up 4 points of material. So this is what I'm saying. So if we go back to this position, yes, on paper, it looks pretty good for white, but I just knew in the back of my head, I was like, I feel like I could take advantage and all these pawns could be mine with the right game play. So I disrupted his whole center, take all the pawns, and from here, the moment I'm up, I see my opponent decides to threaten my attempt to pin my knight to my queen. However, I want to get the queens off the board. What's the best way? Let's win a rook in exchange. For this position, my opponent resigned because he just knew he was straight up losing. The idea with this exchange is that yes, I'm giving up my queen, but I'm gaining a rook. Because after takes, I am up 6.5 points material. And all the pawns that were pushed aside from this one is gone. And likelihood of me doing another rook exchange and promoting would have been really well.